We are full speed ahead in another mind-blowing chapter of chaos on Elbaf in chapter 1138 of One Piece. Everyone is on the move, but before things get too heated, we also take one of our first glimpses into the lost history of this world. So strap in, and let's start with the cover series.
And, as we suspected from the cover art 2 chapters ago, the castle that looks like Who's Who on the outside ends up having him on the inside. Wow. Now, let's move on to the chapter.
We start with the title being Harley, and after hearing mention of the Harley Text about 2 chapters ago in 1136, we very quickly are shown throughout this chapter the Harley Text, which I'm very surprised they pushed it in our face so quickly, but it is going to become a very central part of what we learn about the past and future going forward in this story. But to do so in here would be a big task for us, so we're going to instead dive into the chapter and build our way up to it.
Yeah, starting on page 1, where we actually open with the sight of Loki beaten down and bleeding, but at least still holding on to his consciousness. And as Shamrock throws off his hood, he recognizes the face of the man who brought him to Elbaf, red-haired Shanks.
And just the name being mentioned and dropped in this conversation was clearly enough to stop Shamrock in his tracks, as he was fully ready to just leave this behind. And Gunko does try to tell him, it's like, hey, you don't owe him anything, you don't have to explain anything. But he said the name that really seemed to have struck a nerve with him.
Yeah, and Loki seems really good at telling when he's gotten under someone's skin, as he continues prodding Shamrock by admitting that he has no right to know, but it's only natural curiosity to wonder why 2 polar opposite beings share the same face.
And honestly, to his surprise, or maybe just because he pushed the right buttons, Shamrock does oblige him with that answer, and he's very matter-of-fact about it, mainly saying, hey, that pirate is my younger twin brother. We were separated a long time ago, and he did actually come back to the Holy Land at one point, but he had been tainted by his care for the surface world, this dirty surface world.
Yeah, and he really seems to take that seriously when he says, like, world. Like, how can he look at it with any sort of enjoyment, appreciation?
And I do also think it's just very interesting, the mere mention that we're finding out in this backstory. Not only is he a twin brother, that's the less important part. He apparently has gone back to Marijois.
Yeah, at least once.
And, I mean, this might have been when he met with the Gorosei, but there's a whole lot of time we don't know about Shanks being accounted for where he could have just gone back. So I'd love to find out more about that.
Right, because there's definitely a reason why he would return to such a place where the rest of his family is, even if it sounds like they probably didn't interact.
And speaking of his family, Loki can only scoff now having this explanation at the coincidence that he could hate this family even more than he already did, and now have a grudge against both of these brothers, before threatening Shamrock once more, as he's just been doing over and over while getting his ass kicked.
Right, once I break free, it's all over for you. And I mean, not too surprisingly, that does not sit well with Shamrock. How dare you talking to me that way?
I do find it funny that he like strings all these threats together, but it's like, once I avenge my friends, and he's like, oh, so you threaten me? It's like, no, I've been threatening you.
I'm continuing on my threat.
But this one he apparently is not going to let slide, and he starts to unsheath his sword here by saying he doesn't need to get his own hands dirty, and then addresses his sword by saying, isn't that right, Cerberus?
Yeah, and when I first saw this, I thought that he was like resurrecting like a Cerberus from the lower layer that was Loki's friend, but then you realize, like, no, this is part of his sword.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a Cerberus in the story before, back during Thriller Bark, that Hogback had tied together, but that does not hold a candle to what we see as we enter the next page and get a proper look at Cerberus in all of his 3-headed glory, with the title there for him, and a very interesting note, a very similar cloud around the heads like we see with the Gorosei, perhaps showcasing that this sword who has eaten this fruit is likely awakened as well.
Yeah, and that would be further suggested by the shot that we see of one of the dogs with the sword in its mouth, as if they are truly connected and one.
And rightfully, this terrifies the hell out of Loki, and now all he has to do is question what kind of abomination he's looking at in front of. Yeah, like, this dude's seen war. He's destroyed the castle, killing his dad. this is terrifying.
And I mean, he keeps it pretty simple. Shamrock does just, that's my sword.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, this is the least impressive thing about me. But these flaming blades in the mouth of the Cerberus is just such a frightening sight. And now that it's fully, like, taken form outside of just the saber he has in his hand, it's nearly as large as Loki, it seems. And you see that their collars begin to twist. And I had to reread this a couple times because I wasn't sure what was happening. But they focus on their necks as they get ready to look like they're about to pounce. But they're cut off as Gunko tells them that it's time they depart. And she's preparing this bird of like her bandages and arrows. So she's incredibly adept at using this for pretty much whatever she needs. But in some translations, she also does mention that they should hide their presence as they're leaving, which I think would allude to a very possible advancement in the hockey tree being concealing your hockey. That would explain how they snuck in past all these other great observation users.
Yeah, and could also explain how even when they were using this hockey, how no one else sensed their presence while they were taking out the giants in the castle or anything like that, as they were able to shield it and kind of keep it under wraps.
But we do also see, as the two begin to prepare for their disembarkment, these three heads just launch off of the body of this Cerberus, which explains why they began twisting off their collars as they fully leave the rest of the body behind with Shamrock standing on the ground.
Yeah, and I mean, this is crazy because now the blades are like fully extended well past their mouths. Like, this is basically just shooting three giant swords with sharp, insane teeth. Like, Loki says it himself, like, if this comes at me, I'm done. Like, it's over.
And yet, despite being aware of how much danger he is in, there's nowhere he can go. And all he can do is curse the name of these celestial dragons, in some translation calling them the typical bastards, and in some being a bit more crude with his words. But all he can do is curse their name as he just takes these three blades right in the gut, just horribly impaling him as he's writhing in pain.
And if it's not crazy enough what Shamrock just said to him about, hey, if you survive, you can come, feel free to kill me anytime, he then just moves right on to their next task, which is, alright, if this guy isn't gonna work, we're gonna have to take control of him another way.
Yeah, and the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, so let's take their kids hostage.
Insane. Let's start with the children.
These figurelings don't mess around.
No.
And he also knows that it's going to be harder to feasibly keep this whole population under control. So not only do we have these two impressive God's Knights, but he also tells them to call in one more.
Get another one.
So we're very quickly learning the roster of these God's Knights, and I don't know how many there is. We saw the silhouette with Dragon, but I don't know if that's the exact number.
Right.
So we could very quickly become acclimated with just how dangerous this group is.
I mean, we don't have the name yet, but there's a third one clearly on the way.
But before we can see anything else in terms of learning these ground-shaking character developments, we then cut over to Luffy's group in Aurus Castle, where they have found the injured giant guards, who recount their certainty that it had to have been one red-haired Shanks as one of their assailants.
Yeah, because they know what they saw, and they've met him 1,000 times. It's not someone they're going to mistake. But no matter how sure they are, Luffy just refuses to believe that it could be him. He's way too cool of a guy to be doing something like that, so it just has to be someone who resembles Shanks. It would never be him.
I really love how much Luffy leans into how much he relies on his, like, read of character, where he's right so consistently that he's like, no, he's cool. I like him.
I know him.
He can't have done this.
He's way too chill.
But, I mean, Zoro and Nami that we see throughout the next couple pages both kind of do question it. It's like, hey, Luffy, I know you're really confident. You're usually right about these kind of things, but like...
We did just hear that he was in the land. It makes sense if he stayed there. Like, you're really confident
and
about
they've
this?
seen him before, so they know who he is.
Yeah, but they don't really know that much. They didn't grow up with him.
But despite all of these flaws in the logic, he can't help but be confident about it. This is his mentor, like his pseudo-father figure.
Yeah.
He fully believes in him, and despite what they say, he's not going to be inconsistent with his confidence.
Yeah, to the point that he's like, Nami, you would feel the same way if someone said that about Tim Melmere, which obviously meant Bellemere.
And I do think he knows her name. I think he's just flustered with everything going on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's just, it's very emotional for him that someone would speak ill of his hero like that.
And seeing how flustered he's getting, I think the other giants just kind of want to talk him down, where they're like, okay.
So that I look just like him.
Yeah, he might have a brother or something. Luffy throws out there as like a dart on the dartboard, but happens to hit the bullseye. Where he's like, yeah, maybe he has an identical brother or something.
But it does make him think legitimately about the fact he's never considered Shanks having a real birth family, because as far as he knows, he just grew up on the Roger pirates, was raised by the crew, so they would really be his family. Roger, Rayleigh, and all the rest of the crew members. Other than Buggy.
Yeah, you had to make sure to...
He's like, except that idiot. He was just there.
And he was so young when he met him, too. It's not like you would think as a kid to ask about, like, this figure you're looking up to about their family details all the time.
Oh, and then once you figure out that, Shanks was on that ship, that's his family. And it's the same way it's Luffy's family as his crew.
Exactly. It's all about the found family. But before cutting away from the castle entirely, we do jump outside of the gates to see the same mysterious figure that we very firmly believe to probably be Scopper Gaban, slowly approaching the castle as this conversation gets more and more convoluted.
Yeah, just tapping his way with his cane. And you gotta imagine... he's about to come face to face with another Roger Pirate. Right after he's considering Shanks' family of the Roger Pirates, here comes one of them to tell him all about the past and what they've been through together.
Yeah, and tell him everything he might want to know about Shanks' history that he does been a huge part of.
Yeah, that Loki might not be able to tell him anymore now.
Plus, the bigger thing I think that's more interesting is there's so many parallels as to when they show up in the story, where it's like, Shanks protects him when he's young at the very beginning. Rayleigh protects him from an admiral upping the stakes when they get to Sabaody. Now we might see...
and Crocus puts them on their way in the New World in the first place.
Exactly.
We might the Grand Line.
We might see Scopper either take on a God's Knight or just take him to another level of awareness as to what's really going on at the end of this world. And that's such a minor detail that's lost in this chapter if you don't look at that tiny figure.
I straight up didn't catch it on my first read. I thought it was just like their way of zooming out and being like bigger picture. Like, I did not see the little guy tapping his way because there's already so much going on.
And before Luffy can meet with him to share the past of Shanks, we get a peek into the deeper history of the world according to the teachings of ancient Elbaf. First, starting with Franky as he's exploring the treasure tree atom with Ripley. And they both kind of have a jest where it's like, wow, there's so much tree here and it sells for so much outside of this country.
Yeah, it's just a way that they had different views of it, where he's like, there is no scarcity of this, it's everywhere, it's gigantic. And she's like, oh, well, we've got it everywhere. Maybe I should start making some money off it.
And I think it's kind of funny directly, considering Franky, when he was kind of a crime boss, would tear apart ships and do that kind of stuff because he would be looking for this kind of coveted wood to build his final dream. But now he's like, no, don't bring me back to my past. I'm a new man now.
He's learned respect, and he echoes Saul's words to him, like, hey, don't go chopping up that tree. That's a special thing. Like, it's sacred.
It is really funny, too, that Saul kind of knew, or probably saw it in Franky's eyes. He's like, hey, I know.
Hands off, buddy.
What you did to build this Thousand Sunnies.
He's like, I know this.
Don't you dare touch our tree. And as Franky's just examining it more and more and comes across this gigantic mural, she explains onto the next page that not only is it just this grandiose tree that pretty much fills the entire ecosystem, but there's also what she calls as scribbles by an ancient giant child engraved into the petrified bark, which is now a coveted piece of their cultural heritage because of how long it's been here.
Yeah, and as she dates it, it's directly in the time frame of the Void Century, between 800 to 900 years ago.
And very self-aware in the moment, Franky immediately recognizes, oh, Void Sentry. There's one person that needs to
gotta
know
tell
about
Robin.
this.
We gotta tell Robin.
Yeah, immediately thinks about, okay, I need to tell Robin about this. This could be huge, which I love Franky.
Yeah.
Like, always thinking about the rest of the
Big
crew.
brain Franky.
Yeah, big bro. He's looking out for everybody. But before he can run to find Robin and inform her of this, he is too captivated by what he sees on the mural and begins asking questions, because while this might be a mural by giants, there's way more than just giants in this mural.
Yeah, as we see a few of those different characters drawn out, and I mean the middle one very clearly looks just like Emmett the Iron Giant with his giant horns and the mask.
Yeah, and I mean that's something they just saw on their previous island.
Would be fresh in his mind.
So he probably recognizes it immediately and is like, wait, this is from 800 to 900 years ago? I saw him yesterday.
Yeah, and it's interesting because then she says, even within the history of Elbaf, we've had war with multiple other races. It just never, as far as we know, led to any allegiances, any alliances.
Which is a very dismissive way of thinking about it, but onto the next page, you can see kind of why she might think that way, as she really reduces this image down to, it could all just be the interpretation of a child's dream.
Which, fair, if they think it was drawn by children, who's to say it means anything? But
Sure.
I think we know better.
Yeah, that's a very Occam's razor explanation for this, but as readers, and I think anybody else who has a deeper knowledge of that history, there's so much more that's going to be held into this picture that we're going to have to wait to keep into the final discussion, because there's a lot to cover there.
Yeah, but also, even as Franky was like, hey, Robin needs to see this, she's kind of seeing the written out version of this, little does he know, over across the way.
Yeah, we have to cut over to the Walrus School, where Angie is wrapping up her lesson for the time. And also, as a side note, I want people to be aware, if they are planning on targeting and kidnapping the children of this country, this school is going to be the most dangerous spot on the island in the coming chapters with the God's Knights.
And there's really no one even there, because even the Owl Libraries, they're not directly where the children are either.
No.
So, these kids are truly just...
It's Angie.
Yeah, which clearly not a fighter. That's a teacher. There's no way they're withstanding 3 God's Knights rolling in.
These kids are in trouble, is all we're saying. But speaking of the Owl Library, we also do take the step next door and look inside to see where Saul is now presenting Robin with this ancient tome that inspired pretty much the faith of every giant on this island, and the title of this chapter being the Harley Text.
And as they dust it off, Saul kind of reiterates for them that there are multiple interpretations of this text. They're broken up, fragmented, and they've caused a lot of division between the giants on their exact meanings.
But in another way, it also has created an interesting sort of personal connection with every giant on the island and the sun god, whatever iteration they have created for him in their head, which is kind of why everyone's so committed to it, because it's not one idea that people might find flaws in. It's their own personal creation.
Yeah, it's what does it say to you, and what does that mean?
And
they all still worship it in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a shared idea, but everyone's own personal version, which is a really interesting view on this sort of religion in the story. And of course, this is enough to intrigue Robin that she wants to read it herself and asked if she could crack into the book, which Saul wastes no time obliging.
Yeah, very excited for her to the point that he just starts giving the background music of the Drums of Liberation, and so excitedly that Robin had to be like, hey man, I'm just gonna read it now, I need you to chill.
Yeah, no, he gives her the spark notes real quick, where he's like, okay, so there's these chapters, and there's so many different details, but the one thing that's consistent, like you said, is those Drums of Liberation, and we see the same dance that even Kuma learned from his dad Clap when they were in slavery in Marie Joie. So I love every time we see this dance. It's just kind of a feel-good, goofy thing thrown in there that's like one of the most relevant details of the story. And it's really cool. But Robin does start to read this text, and as she starts to read it out loud, we see this horrified look of Franky, almost like in pure shock. And it's not until we reach the final page that we can understand why this is.
Yeah, and I mean, what she's reading and what he is just taking in visually are very much connected in what might be the best double spread we've ever gotten in this entire series.
I mean, especially since we got into Elbaf, there were great ones on Egghead. There's been so many great ones in the story.
The Gorosei one went crazy.
Yeah, but this is just such a fan service in terms of people that have been so invested in this world and lore.
On all the detail.
Oh, there's so much detail. But we're going to break it up into each of the 3 chapters and kind of reference what we see in the mural below that we think is most relevant to what is being discussed.
And just like Saul had just mentioned, there are different versions available, different interpretations, even within just this chapter online already. So we're just going to read what we see as the most succinct and easy to digest version. So, chapter 1, The First World. There was fire upon the earth. Humanity succumbed to desire and touched the forbidden sun. The slaves made a wish, and the god of the sun appeared. But the god of the earth became enraged, and alongside the serpent of hell, enveloped the world in death and darkness. They could never meet again.
A very ominous start to this world, but we see in the mural itself, on the very bottom right corner, that this super advanced civilization built on the back of these seemingly indentured workers, where there's just flames framing around the edge of it as if they've always existed in this, and very likely being slaves. And as we've learned in the story, they probably called on some kind of hero and got in return the sun god, that very first iteration of it that we know today.
Right, to liberate them from this slavery and show them freedom. And this also very likely led to the spawning of the Red Line that divided the people of the world in the first place.
They mentioned the god of the earth, and I mean, they show a giant serpent there as well.
Which could be
this,
the
serpent
or
of
whatever,
hell,
yeah.
Or Jormungandr, or whatever you want to think of it as. But I think the idea of them being divided by the god of the earth and thinking about the Red Line makes a lot of sense, considering how much it divided the world pretty much in half automatically, keeping those people apart, and so that they would never meet again. And looking at the second chapter, titled The Second World, it goes as follows. There was a breath upon the emptiness. The god of the forest sent forth demons. The sun merely spread the embers of war. The people of the half-moon dreamed. The people of the moon dreamed. Humanity killed the sun and then ascended to divinity. The god of the sea became enraged. They could never meet again.
And throughout this second chapter, really most of the discussion focuses solely on humanity killing the sun god and rising to their own level of divinity, which in turn enraged the sea god, which likely caused the great flood that we see to the right of Franky with the Noah now submerged underwater.
Yeah, there was just so much turmoil, and even the sun god spreading the embers of war seemingly taking part of this, which very much might indicate that another iteration of Nika might have not been the kindest that we have with Luffy or with the initial version, and because of that, maybe that king standing atop the sea as it's flooding might be Joy Boy himself, or might be the king of the world that instead took advantage of this divided time. But rising to divinity seems to definitely allude to humans becoming celestial dragons and rising the Red Line like we know.
Which also makes you question where Emu even plays a role in all this. Was it them who corrupted Joy Boy in the first place, which is why he wrote that apology letter to Poseidon? Was it all a lie? Was maybe the sun god not even a negative person, but it was just pitched as that to the people and they were tricked into that? Who knows?
There's only more questions with the answers we get. But that does bring us to the third chapter in the third world, which occupies about half of the mural, and it goes as follows. There was a void upon the chaos, the unbidden shadows, remember the day of promise, and they hear the voice of the fragmented moon. The god of the sun dances and laughs, guiding the world to its end. The sun will return, and a new dawn will come. They will surely meet again.
And, man, wow. As we just learned, the third world represents the current times. So finally, in the world's darkest hour, those who have loomed in the shadows are finally coming forth, led by the sun god, to overcome the darkness and make the world anew. And I mean, this can be showcased by the massive collection of all different kinds of species that we see across this, confronting the figure holding the sun in its hand.
And I mean, just the mere idea of the mention of Dawn, which New Dawn being one of the first parts of this series, and the idea of unbidden shadows, as Emu himself has even described the Will of D being people who walk in the shadows of history. There's so much here to suggest that this is leading into the final war, and I think the collection of warriors confronting this gigantic demon holding their freedom in its hand couldn't depict that any better. But there's still a number of small details to take in this mural that we wanted to make sure we touched on at least before coming to the conclusion of this chapter review.
Right. The first being the three dark figures that we see kind of split up the three sections of this mural. And we believe these represent the three ancient weapons. First, with the weapon of the sea, Poseidon, in the first world.
I mean, and you see the flying figure, which could be the giant space laser we see destroy Lucia.
Ruin the world, rose the sea to this level, buried the ancient civilization.
And very much could potentially be Poseidon, or I mean, these could also be the gods of the earth or the gods of the sea, but the number 3 matching up with these powers that are world destroying seems pretty on the nose. But there also is the concept of the ancient kingdom being built on top of the slave labor that you see in the bottom right corner, as there's people caught in the gears in a boat, and all of these great luxurious buildings only atop of what these other people are, just like Marie Joie.
Yeah, we saw that mirrored when the fishmen were first visited, where it's like there's more going on than meets the eye, and then we see all those slaves beneath making the road move.
And on that same side of the mural, you also see 2 very recognizable ships that we've seen in different parts of the series, with the Noah, as we mentioned, under the water, awaiting for its chance to rise again, but also following the thunderbolt from it all the way up above it, you see the Arc Maxim headed to the moon, just like Enel built and sent from Skypiea, possibly drawing direct inspiration from some mural he might have seen on Burka that depicted this exact thing.
And then, along with all of this, we just see almost every type of race and creature that could be a part of this final battle. Up near the top here with like the wings and little, what could be flames on its head, that could be the Lunarians. We see fishmen, what could be minks, the big Emmet is back.
There's also the idea of, I mean, you see one of the darkened ships has samurai on it with top knots, and above that directly you see what looks like either Alabasta's flag, but we've seen that symbol a bunch of times, also on Elbaf ships.
And then going right at it, right there in the middle is Luffy.
Yeah, you see the sun god, you see the floating ship next to the giant deity, you also see a floating whale, which might be the pod whales in Laboon, and crashing into the red line to break that down. There's every major person or species or group that we've seen in this story that seems like they would reasonably be on our side for freedom, depicted here, almost telling us that this final war is going to pretty much involve everybody we've met to this point that we could call an ally.
And I mean, between all of the words and all of what we see, the bottom corner pretty much sums it up. The world myth revealed. There is so much here that is just peeling back the veil of everything that led up to this moment.
This is just an absolute gem of a chapter from start to finish. Like you said, peeling back the curtain on some of the more mysterious groups that we've seen in this One Piece world. And not only did we receive backstory on characters like Shanks and seeing long-awaited powers like the Cerberus Devil Fruit, but we end on what is possibly one of the best double spreads in the entire story, giving us so much lore that we've waited so long to know and speculated about multiple times over as fans.
And there's no break. They're just going to keep on going, keep revealing stuff. I mean, we might get Scopper Gabon next chapter.
There's just no slowing down. He warned us 2025 would be a hectic year.
He was not joking.
We're off to a pretty fast start. So, until that chapter comes out, be sure to like the video if you enjoyed breaking down this insane chapter together. Comment if there's any details we might have missed from the mural or just somewhere else in the chapter. Subscribe for more One Piece content like this in the future. And as always, be crew!